The moon hung low over the mesa, pale and watchful, as if heaven itself was holding its breath. The night was too still, too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes right before something changes forever. Cassidy Lane had been raised to trust her instincts, and tonight they told her trouble was near. She sat her horse just outside her father's ranch, lantern swinging gently from the saddle horn, scanning the dark line of the hills beyond the creek. The cattle had been restless all week. Something, or someone, was out there. She was about to turn back when she heard it, the crack of a branch, the shuffle of boots. Her hand went to the small pistol tucked in her belt, though she wasn't sure she'd have the courage to use it. Then he stepped from the shadows. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, coat torn from riding hard, hat low over his eyes. He looked like he'd been carved out of the same dust that clung to the plains, all edges and silence. "Evenin', ma'am," he said, voice low and rough. Her breath caught. "Who are you?" He didn't answer right away. His gaze flicked past her toward the ranch lights, then back to her, measuring, calculating. "I ain't here to hurt you," he said finally. "Just need a horse and a place to catch my breath." The way he said it, calm, too calm, made her pulse race faster. "You picked the wrong place," she said, trying to sound brave. He smiled faintly, not the kind of smile that reached his eyes. "Seems I did." Before she could move, he stepped forward and took the lantern from her hand. His grip was firm, but not cruel. "I ain't gonna harm you," he said again, softer this time. "But if I don't keep ridin', I'm a dead man before sunrise." That was when she saw it, the blood on his sleeve, dark and drying, and the badge lying half buried in the dust behind him. Not his. Someone else's. Her throat tightened. "You killed a lawman." He met her gaze, steady and unreadable. "He gave me no choice." He turned as if to leave, but she moved her horse instinctively, blocking his path. "If you're runnin', they'll be comin' here. My father's men." He looked past her toward the lights again, then back at her, something almost like regret flickering across his face. "I'm sorry, miss," he murmured. "I can't let you call for them." And before she could reach for her gun, he stepped close, catching her wrist. His touch wasn't rough, it was careful, restrained, like a man holding back everything he wanted not to be. "I just need a horse," he said again, voice lower now. "Then I'll be gone." "You've got my word." But when the distant sound of riders echoed across the hills, too close, too fast, he cursed under his breath. "Too late," he said. "They're already here." Her heart pounded. "You brought them to my home." He looked toward the horizon, then back at her. "Then I guess you're ridin' with me." Before she could argue, he swung up behind her, one arm firm around her waist as he spurred her horse into the darkness. The wind tore at her hair, the lantern fell and shattered behind them, and the world became a blur of hooves, breath, and fear. They rode hard through the canyon, his voice low against her ear, not a threat, but a promise. "I won't hurt you," he said again. "You got my word, Mississippi Lane. You'll be safe." She wanted to believe him. God help her, she wanted to. But as the canyon swallowed them whole, she realized she wasn't afraid of dying anymore. She was afraid of what this outlaw was already doing to her heart. The canyon narrowed as they rode, walls rising high and jagged against a bruised purple sky. The outlaw's arm stayed firm around her, guiding the horse through the winding trail, his breath steady despite the chase behind them. She could still hear the distant thunder of riders, the faint cry of men hunting a ghost through the desert night. They rode until the moon vanished behind the cliffs, until her hands went numb from gripping the saddle horn and her heart felt caught between fear and something she couldn't name. When he finally slowed, the horse shuddered beneath them, foam streaking its neck. The outlaw dismounted, every movement slow and deliberate, as if each breath had to be earned. He helped her down, his hand rough but steady on her waist. She pulled away the moment her boots touched the ground, though her knees almost gave beneath her. He said nothing. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the creak of leather and the restless snort of the horse. He led the animal toward a shadow tucked into the canyon wall, an old cabin half collapsed beneath time and wind. Its roof sagged, its windows were dark, but smoke stains on the stone chimney told of someone who'd once called it home. He pushed the door open and stepped inside first. She hesitated. Every sensible thought told her to run, to scream, to take her chance. But the sound of the pursuing riders was fading into the distance now, swallowed by the canyon. There was nowhere to go but forward. Inside, the air was cold and still. He dropped his saddlebags onto the floorboards and knelt beside the stone hearth, striking a match with one gloved hand. Light flickered, chasing the shadows up the wall. She saw him clearly then, the tired lines at the corners of his eyes, the dried blood on his shirt sleeve, the faint tremor in his fingers when he thought she wasn't watching. He wasn't just dangerous. He was wounded. She kept her back to the wall, arms folded tight. He tore a strip from his coat, pressing it against the wound at his side. She couldn't help it, the instinct that had driven her since childhood, the one her mother used to call foolish kindness. She stepped forward. "You'll bleed out if you keep that covered in dirt," she said softly in her head, though the words never left her lips. He looked up, sensing her movement, and for a moment their eyes met in the glow of the fire. The world outside, the hunt, the fear, her father's ranch, felt far away. He finally spoke, his voice rougher now. Told her to sit, to rest, that he didn't mean for things to happen this way. He hadn't planned to drag her into his mess. But the sheriff and his men had forced his hand. He'd been framed, he said. The law pinned a murder on him that wasn't his. She didn't know whether to believe him. Outlaws all had stories, didn't they? But something in the way he said it, in the weary honesty behind his words, cracked the doubt inside her chest. She asked his name. He hesitated before answering. Said he'd gone by many, but once, long ago, his mother called him Luke. Cassidy. She told him hers quietly, like a secret. He nodded once. Cassidy Lane, daughter of the man whose cattle grazed half the valley. She saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, maybe guilt, maybe something else. He leaned back against the wall, exhaustion softening the sharp lines of his face. She watched him for a long time, the fire painting shadows over the rough planes of his jaw. There was something different about him. He didn't leer or boast the way other men did. He carried silence the way others carried pride. When the fire began to die, she pulled a blanket from the shelf and threw it at him without a word. He caught it, a faint ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. The night stretched on, long and quiet. She sat near the fire, staring into the flames, wondering what her father would think, if he'd even look for her. He'd been distant since her mother passed, lost in his land and his whiskey. She'd been left to handle the ranch hands and the debts alone. Maybe that's why she wasn't as scared as she should have been. Maybe she knew what it was like to feel trapped, just in a different kind of prison. Luke slept fitfully, turning now and then, murmuring names she didn't know. She realized, as the firelight flickered over his face, that he couldn't be much older than her. Sometime before dawn, the wind picked up outside. She rose quietly, stepped to the door, and looked out at the canyon below. The stars were fading, the horizon just starting to blush with light. She thought about running. The trail was steep, but if she followed it east, she could reach the next ranch by noon. But when she turned back, she saw Luke stirring, clutching his side, pain tightening his jaw. And just like that, the idea of leaving him behind felt wrong. She sighed, grabbed the kettle, and stepped outside to fill it from the creek. By the time the sun climbed over the ridge, the cabin smelled faintly of coffee and smoke. When Luke opened his eyes, she was there, sitting near the hearth, watching him with cautious curiosity. He blinked against the light and gave her a tired smile, the first real one she'd seen from him. It wasn't the smile of an outlaw. It was the smile of a man who'd almost forgotten what kindness felt like. She didn't smile back, not yet. But something inside her shifted, quiet and dangerous as the dawn. The sun rose harsh and red over the canyon, painting the stone walls in fire. Cassidy had never felt a morning so still, so fragile. She could hear the distant cry of hawks, the faint rush of the creek, the slow rhythm of a man trying to hide his pain. Luke sat near the hearth, one arm pressed against his ribs where the bullet had grazed him. He'd stripped away the blood-stained shirt, his skin bronzed and scarred from years of hard riding and harder living. She caught herself staring for too long, then turned back to the fire, cheeks warming despite the chill. He asked her, in that low drawl of his, how long she planned on staying mad at him. She didn't answer. Maybe she didn't know. He'd taken her against her will, yes, but he hadn't oppressed her. In fact, he'd risked slowing himself down to make sure she was safe. That was a strange thing for a man on the run to do. By mid-morning, he'd managed to saddle the horse again, though his movements were slower, strained. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him tighten the straps. "You're still hurt," she thought. "You'll never make it across the ridge like that." He seemed to sense what she was thinking. Told her not to worry, that he'd been through worse. But the way he swayed on his feet told a different story. That was when she heard it, the faint echo of voices carried on the wind. Not close, not yet, but enough to make the hairs rise on her neck. Luke froze. His hand went to the revolver at his belt. Bounty hunters. They'd found his trail. He cursed under his breath and grabbed her hand before she could move. His touch was urgent, not rough, and his eyes met hers with a flash of something fierce. Not fear, something deeper. He told her they had to go. Now. They mounted the horse, Cassidy in front this time, Luke behind her, his arms around her waist as he guided the reins. The horse leapt forward, hooves striking sparks from the canyon floor. Behind them, the sound of riders grew louder, echoing off the stone walls. Cassidy's heart hammered in her chest. She'd ridden fast before, but never like this. Wind tore through her hair, dust stung her eyes, and the world blurred into motion and sound. Luke's voice cut through it all, calm and certain, telling her which turns to take, where the trail forked, how to stay low when bullets started to sing past them. One bullet struck a rock near her boot, shattering the stone. She flinched, but Luke steadied her with a hand on her shoulder. They reached the upper ridge just as the sun burned high overhead. The hunters were still behind them, but the trail split into two directions, a narrow pass to the west and an open valley to the south. Luke chose the pass. The horse strained against the incline, the path twisting like a snake between rocks. Cassidy glanced back once and saw three riders closing in, rifles glinting in the light. Luke fired once, the shot echoing across the cliffs. One of the pursuers reeled back, his horse stumbling. The others hesitated. That was all the time they needed. They reached the top and burst into open country, a wide stretch of meadow that rolled toward a distant stand of pines. Cassidy could feel Luke's breath against her neck, hot and uneven. When they finally slowed, both were shaking. She turned in the saddle to look at him, her heart still pounding. He smiled faintly through the dust. Said she rode better than most men he knew. She wanted to be angry at him for saying it, but the way he looked at her, half teasing, half tender, made her chest tighten instead. They found shelter that night in a grove of aspens near a creek. Luke's wound had opened again. He tried to hide it, but she saw the blood staining his bandage. She tore a strip from her dress and helped him rewrap it, hands trembling slightly as she worked. He didn't stop her. Just watched her with quiet eyes, the firelight flickering across his face. When she was done, he murmured that she didn't owe him kindness. She told him it wasn't kindness. It was decency. He laughed softly, the sound rough and rare. Told her it had been a long time since anyone treated him decently. They sat by the fire after that, saying little. The silence between them had changed, it wasn't made of fear anymore, but of something warmer, more dangerous. She caught herself studying the lines of his face, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. He told her, after a while, that he'd been a ranch hand once, long ago. Before the war, before the wanted posters. Said he'd lost everything when the wrong men took over the law in his county. He'd killed a man who deserved it, but the badge didn't care about that. Since then, he'd been running. Cassidy didn't know why, but hearing it broke something inside her. She'd lost her mother to sickness, lost her father to silence, lost her own laughter to the dust of the ranch. Maybe they weren't so different, she and this outlaw. The choices of others trapped both. The night stretched long. The fire burned low. Somewhere between exhaustion and the steady rhythm of his breathing, Cassidy felt her fear give way to something else, something fragile, something she wasn't ready to name. She told herself it was only pity. But when she woke before dawn, his coat was draped over her shoulders, and she knew pity had nothing to do with it. The dawn broke soft and gold over the meadow, the mist curling around the creek like breath. Cassidy woke to birdsong and the sound of boots scraping softly over dirt. Luke was already up, packing his gear, his movements slow but sure despite the pain. For a moment, she watched him in silence. There was something steady in the way he moved, something that didn't fit the word outlaw. He wasn't restless like the men her father hired on the ranch, he carried himself like someone used to building fences, fixing saddles, living by the rhythm of work. He caught her watching and gave her a faint grin that vanished as quickly as it came. Told her they'd ride for the border town by noon, find fresh supplies, maybe part ways if luck held. The words landed heavier than they should have. Part ways. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They rode in silence most of the morning. The land opened before them, rolling hills fading into sagebrush plains, the horizon so wide it hurt to look at. Every mile carried them farther from danger, and yet, Cassidy felt something tightening inside her, like the closer they got to safety, the nearer they were to something she wasn't ready to lose. Luke stopped only once, near an old windmill that creaked and moaned in the wind. He filled their canteens and glanced at her horse. Said she handled a ride like she'd been born in the saddle. She told him she'd grown up with cattle, storms, and men who thought her too stubborn for her own good. He laughed quietly, told her that stubborn was just another word for brave. By midday, they reached the border town, a crooked collection of wooden buildings huddled against the desert. It looked peaceful, almost sleepy, but Luke's jaw tightened as soon as he saw it. He knew places like this, where law wore a friendly face until it recognized you. He told her to stay with the horses while he checked the general store. She waited by the trough, dust clinging to her dress, the air humming with heat. She should have been thinking of escape. She should have been looking for a way to get word home. Instead, she found herself scanning the crowd for him, watching the way people looked at strangers who didn't belong. When he returned, his hat was low and his voice softer. Said he'd found a man willing to trade a clean horse and a map. He'd ride north at sunset, cross into the high country. He didn't say she could come, but he didn't say she couldn't either. They sat behind the livery barn, sharing a crust of bread and a few apples. Cassidy stared at the dust swirling in the air, thinking of her father's ranch, the men who'd surely be searching for her by now. He asked her if she wanted to go home. The question cut straight through her. She thought of the quiet house, the hollow eyes of her father, the endless work that dulled every dream she'd ever had. And yet, leaving meant giving up the only world she'd ever known. She told him she didn't know. He nodded like he understood. Said sometimes home ain't a place, but a person you find when you least expect it. She looked up, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just him, the line of his jaw, the way his eyes softened when they met hers, the quiet honesty in his voice. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of dust and horses and something unspoken. Then he stood, pulling his hat lower. Said he needed to move before the law caught his scent. He handed her a small folded map, told her there was a stage route 2 miles east. If she followed it, she could reach safety by nightfall. He told her she deserved a life without running, without fear. She wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't want safety if it meant leaving him behind. But the words tangled in her throat. He mounted the horse and looked down at her, eyes shadowed beneath the brim. Said he was sorry for dragging her into this, that she'd been braver than most men he'd ever known. Then he turned his horse toward the open desert. She watched him ride away, the sun burning high, his figure shrinking against the horizon until he was just a dark speck swallowed by the light. The silence afterward was unbearable. The town noise faded, and all she could hear was the wind whispering through the dry grass. She stared at the map in her hand. It felt like a weight she couldn't bear. By sundown, she was still standing in the same place, watching the desert where he'd gone. The ache in her chest was sharp, unfamiliar. She told herself he was an outlaw, a fugitive, a man she should hate. But when the last light bled from the sky, she climbed onto her horse and turned toward the same horizon he'd disappeared into. Because sometimes, the heart doesn't care for reason. It only knows where it belongs. The night was cold on the open plain. The stars burned bright and distant above, their light scattered across the empty sky like spilled dust. Cassidy rode hard, her cloak snapping behind her in the wind, the map folded away and forgotten. She followed only instinct now, and the trail of a man she couldn't stop thinking about. The land grew rougher as she moved deeper into the hills. The moon hung low, glinting off the rocks, casting long shadows that twisted and moved with the wind. Each sound set her heart racing, the cry of a coyote, the rattle of dry grass, but she didn't slow. By dawn, she saw it, the thin curl of smoke rising from a hollow beneath the cliffs. She knew before she even reached it that it was him. Luke sat by a dying campfire, shoulders hunched, hat tipped low. He looked smaller somehow, worn down by the weight of running. When he saw her, he froze, disbelief flickering across his face. She dismounted and stood before him, chest heaving from the ride. Neither spoke at first. The silence was thick, full of everything they hadn't said. He told her she shouldn't have come. That she didn't owe him anything. That the law would hang him if they found him. She told him she didn't come because she owed him. She came because she couldn't forget him. For a long moment, he just looked at her, really looked, like a man seeing something he didn't believe he deserved. His eyes softened, and something inside him broke loose, something he'd kept chained for too many years. He said her name like it was the first prayer he'd ever spoken. But before the moment could settle, the sharp echo of gunfire cracked through the air. Cassidy flinched as a bullet splintered the log beside her. Luke pulled her down behind the rocks, his arm wrapping around her instinctively. She saw movement on the ridge, men on horseback, rifles glinting in the sun. The bounty hunters had found him. He cursed under his breath and fired back, each shot clean and precise. Cassidy grabbed his spare revolver without thinking, loading rounds the way her father once taught her. The fight raged for what felt like forever, dust rising, gunfire flashing, the smell of smoke and fear heavy in the air. When it was over, 3 men lay still on the ridge. The rest fled into the horizon, their courage lost. But Luke had taken another hit, a clean graze across his arm, deep enough to bleed. Cassidy tore fabric from her cloak and pressed it against the wound. Her hands shook, but her voice didn't. She told him he wasn't dying on her now. He laughed softly, breathless, eyes bright with pain and something like wonder. Said he never figured a woman like her would ride into hell for a man like him. She told him she didn't ride for him. She rode for the truth. He caught her wrist then, gentle but firm. His voice went low, rough. Told her he'd been running his whole life, from the law, from guilt, from himself, but when she looked at him, he felt like he could stop. Like maybe he wasn't the man the posters said he was. The wind quieted. The fire crackled low. For the first time, neither of them looked away. Cassidy leaned in close enough to see every shadow in his eyes, every scar that told the story of a man who'd fought the world and lost more than he should have. She told him he wasn't lost anymore. He told her she'd set him free. They stayed hidden until dusk. When the light turned golden and soft across the plains, they buried the weapons, saddled the horse, and rode south, not toward the border, not toward safety, but toward whatever life waited beyond the mountains. Days turned into weeks. The wanted posters faded, the bounty riders stopped coming. Rumors drifted through the frontier, that the outlaw Luke Carter had vanished, that a woman had ridden with him and never returned. In a small valley beneath the aspen trees, far from the reach of the law, two figures built a home from nothing. A cabin, a corral, a quiet stream that caught the morning light. Sometimes, when the wind carried the faint whistle of a distant train or the call of coyotes, Cassidy would pause in her work and glance toward the horizon. She never missed the ranch, the empty rooms, or the loneliness. She'd found her freedom here, in a man who once took her hostage, and in the love that had broken every chain between them. Luke would come in from the fields, dust on his coat, the sun in his eyes. He'd wrap an arm around her shoulders, pull her close, and tell her the same thing he'd told her that night under the stars. That sometimes, the hardest road leads straight to the heart. And though the world might call him an outlaw till the end of time, to her, he was the man who'd shown her what it meant to be truly free.